liverwurst spread thick enough to hold a thumbprint, pineapple rings pressed into mayonnaise on soft white bread, grape jelly melted against a slab of Velveeta. These were real lunches packed by real hands, and most of them vanished before anyone wrote them down. Here are 30 strange sandwiches from the 1970s that we actually loved. Your father came home from the deli with it wrapped in white butcher paper, the smell leaking through before he set the bag on the counter. Liverwurst, soft, spreadable, made from pork liver ground so fine it went on bread like cold butter, was a staple in German-American households from the 40s through the mid-70s. He'd spread it thick on dark rye, top it with a raw onion ring and a stripe of yellow mustard, and eat it standing over the sink. In the Midwest, you ate yours with sweet pickled gherkins. In the Northeast, dill pickles and nothing else. Braunschweiger, the smoked version, carried an even deeper flavor, almost bacon-like, and the old German butcher shops sold it by the half-pound from a ceramic crock behind the counter. By the 80s, the organ meat version had taken hold, and liverwurst began its long slide off deli menus. Boar's Head stopped making it entirely in 2024. The rye bread it belonged on, the good kind with caraway seeds so thick they cracked between your teeth that bread is harder to find than the meat. The fried peanut butter and banana sandwich got its fame from Memphis, but it lived in kitchens long before anyone called it the Elvis. The trick, the one his cook, Mary Jenkins, figured out, was toasting the bread first, loading it with creamy peanut butter and sliced banana, pressing the halves together, and frying the whole thing in butter until the outside turned golden and the inside went soft. His father, Vernon, showed Mary the method. She said Elvis ate them at every hour, butter running down his arm, never once measuring anything. In February of 1976, he flew from Graceland to Denver at 1 in the morning to eat the Fool's Gold loaf, a hollowed-out French bread stuffed with a jar of peanut butter, a jar of preserves, and a pound of bacon, at a hangar on the tarmac. That sandwich cost $49.95. The simple version, though, the one you could make at midnight with whatever was in the pantry, that was the one worth remembering. Nobody under 40 knows what an olive and cream cheese sandwich is, but mention it to anyone who grew up in the 1960s or 70s, and you'll get a story. The spread was simple: softened Philadelphia cream cheese, chopped green olives with the pimento still in them, and just enough olive brine to loosen it up. Some families added pecans, others swore by walnuts. The whole thing went on crustless white bread, cut into triangles, and appeared at every baby shower, bridal luncheon, and bridge club meeting from Mobile to Minneapolis. The women who made it never used a recipe. They knew the ratio by the color of the spread: pale green with flecks of red, loose enough to smear but stiff enough to hold the bread together. One woman remembered eating her first one from a cooler in her grandmother's back seat during a road trip, and the taste, briny, creamy, cold from the ice, was the taste of every summer drive she ever took. The woman who packed that cooler has been gone for years. The sandwich went with her. Ham salad started the way everything started in those kitchens, with leftovers. The Sunday ham came out of the oven on a platter, fed the family through dinner and cold slices on Monday, and by Tuesday, the rest went through the hand-cranked meat grinder that was bolted to the edge of the counter. You could hear it from the next room, the rhythmic grinding of metal teeth turning cooked meat into something spreadable. She mixed the ground ham with mayonnaise, sweet pickle relish, a little mustard, maybe diced celery if she had it, and packed it into a Tupperware bowl that lived in the refrigerator all week. It fed whoever needed feeding: school lunches, afternoon snacks, a quick supper when nobody felt like cooking. The beauty of ham salad was its refusal to go to waste. Nothing was thrown out. The bone went into soup, the fat went into beans, and the last scraps went through that grinder until there was nothing left but the smell of smoke on your hands. If ham salad was a mother's invention, the cheese and grape jelly sandwich was a child's. Kraft ran recipe cards in the 1960s and 70s, pushing every combination of Velveeta and processed American cheese they could dream up, and somewhere in that golden age of supermarket ingenuity, grape jelly met a slice of cheddar, and nobody looked back. Kids made it themselves. That was half the appeal. 2 slices of white bread, a thick square of cheese peeled from its plastic sleeve, a knife load of Welch's grape pressed together and eaten over the sink the same way their fathers ate liverwurst. Parents who caught you making one shook their heads but said nothing because the sweet, salty logic of it actually worked. The cheese held its ground against the sugar, the jelly cut through the salt, and for about 3 minutes you had something that tasted like you'd invented it yourself. You hadn't. Every kid on the block already knew. Thomas's sold date nut bread in a can, a small, heavy cylinder that you opened from both ends and pushed the loaf out whole, dark as gingerbread and dense with chopped dates and walnuts. You sliced it thin, spread each round with cold cream cheese, and ate it in the afternoon with tea or coffee while the house was quiet. It was a tea room sandwich before it was a home sandwich, the kind of thing women's clubs served at luncheons in the 1950s alongside finger sandwiches and fruit salad in stemmed glasses. By the 70s, the canned loaf had moved from tea rooms to kitchen counters, and the women who bought it didn't need a club meeting to justify the indulgence. They ate it standing at the counter the way men ate liverwurst, quickly, alone, with no one watching. Thomas's still makes it, but the women who sliced it thin enough to see light through the bread are mostly gone now, and their daughters buy sourdough instead. In the South, a pineapple sandwich was not a joke. It was a real thing made by real women who saw nothing strange about laying a ring of canned Dole pineapple on a slice of white bread spread with Duke's mayonnaise. The tang of the fruit against the richness of the mayo was a flavor profile that made perfect sense to anyone who'd grown up eating sweet pickles on ham. That push and pull between sugar and fat was the whole architecture of Southern sandwich making. Some added a slice of American cheese, others sprinkled the pineapple with a little salt. The most committed version grilled it, letting the cheese melt and the pineapple caramelize until the kitchen smelled like a county fair griddle. It sounds impossible until you taste it, and then it sounds like your grandmother knew something about flavor balance that culinary school couldn't teach. The pineapple had to be canned. Fresh was too tart, too wet, too unpredictable. Control was part of the recipe. Underwood deviled ham came in a flat tin with a red devil on the label, the oldest trademarked food product in America, stamped with that little pitchfork since 1868. The meat inside was ground so fine it was almost a paste, salty and smoky and spreadable with a butter knife, and you either loved it or you pretended it didn't exist. The old-timers mixed it with sweet pickle relish and a dab of mustard, spread it on soft white bread, and called it lunch. Children who opened their lunch boxes to find one either traded it fast or ate it in 2 bites before anyone could comment. The genius of the can was that it kept forever, cost next to nothing, and didn't require refrigeration until you cracked it open. For families feeding 5 or 6 on a shift worker's pay, that little red devil did more work than any filet mignon ever could. Nobody talks about deviled ham anymore, but the cans are still there on the bottom shelf, waiting for someone to remember. She kept the Braunschweiger in the back of the refrigerator, wrapped in its original casing, and sliced it herself with a thin knife she used for nothing else. Braunschweiger was liverwurst that had been smoked, giving it a deeper, almost bacon-like richness that spread across dark pumpernickel like it was born there. Jones Dairy Farm sold it in stubby rolls at every Midwestern grocery store, and the label hadn't changed since the 50s. Her version went on pumpernickel with a thick slice of raw onion and a smear of brown mustard so sharp it made your eyes water. You didn't ask why she preferred it to regular liverwurst. You watched her build it layer by layer, with the same hands that patched your jeans and braided your hair. Years later, you tried to make one yourself from a roll you found at a German butcher shop 2 towns over. The mustard was right. The onion was right. But the pumpernickel was wrong, and you couldn't figure out what she'd done differently until you realized it wasn't the bread. It was the kitchen. The men who ate sardine sandwiches did not apologize for them. They peeled back the tin lid with the key, laid the small silver fish across dark rye bread, squeezed lemon from a wedge in the refrigerator door, added a line of hot mustard, and ate at the kitchen table with a glass of beer and the evening paper. The sardines came packed in olive oil or mustard sauce, imported from Portugal or Norway, and the brands mattered. King Oscar for the purists, Beechcliff for the budget-minded, Brunswick for the ones who bought whatever was on sale. During the Depression, sardines were protein you could afford when meat was a luxury, and that reputation clung to the fish long after the hard times ended. By the 70s, a sardine sandwich was a working man's lunch, eaten without ceremony. The smell lingered in the kitchen for hours afterward, and everyone knew what he'd had. He didn't care. The fish cost 30 cents a tin and kept him full until dinner. But decades before sardines and liverwurst filled factory lunchboxes, another kind of working lunch was holding its own in southeastern Massachusetts. The chow mein sandwich came out of Fall River in the 20s, where Chinese restaurant owners married crispy fried noodles with celery, bean sprouts, and shredded pork, smothered the whole thing in brown gravy, and stuffed it into a hamburger bun. It was carbs on carbs, noodles inside bread, and the textile workers who ate them at lunch counters didn't blink. Howard Johnson's picked it up. School cafeterias in Providence served it on Fridays during Lent, when Catholic families needed something filling. The gravy soaked through the bun in minutes, turning the bottom half into something you ate with a fork, and the flavor, salty, savory, faintly sweet from the bean sprouts, was worth the mess. Outside New England, almost nobody has heard of it. Inside Fall River, a handful of Chinese restaurants still serve them, each one a quiet monument to the cooks who figured out how to feed a mill town. At the deli counter, olive loaf sat next to the bologna and the pimento loaf in a row of pink processed meats that all looked vaguely related. It was bologna's stranger cousin, the same smooth, finely ground pork and beef, but shot through with chunks of green pimento stuffed olives that stared back at you from every slice like tiny eyes. Oscar Mayer made the version most people knew, pre-packaged in thin slices with that particular plastic smell that clung to the meat no matter how fast you peeled it off. Paired with a slice of American cheese on white bread, it was a lunchbox constant for kids who didn't get to choose what they ate. Some loved the salty olive bursts, most tolerated them. A few traded the sandwich away before the bell rang. Oscar Mayer stopped making olive loaf quietly, the way all unfashionable foods disappear, not with an announcement but with an empty space on the shelf that nobody noticed until it was too late to say goodbye. The peanut butter and mayonnaise sandwich sounds like a dare until you learn it fed half the South during the Depression. Newspapers in the 40s printed instructions for mixing the two into a spreadable consistency, enough peanut butter for heft, enough mayo for moisture, and slathering it across whatever bread was cheapest. The combination packed fat and protein into a single meal that cost almost nothing, and for families stretching $1 past its breaking point, that arithmetic mattered more than flavor. But the thing nobody expected, it tasted good. The salt in the peanut butter leaned into the tang of the mayonnaise, and the texture, dense, slick, heavy on the tongue, stayed with you through a full afternoon of work. Mothers passed it to daughters who passed it to their own kids, and by the 70s it had outlived the poverty that created it. People ate it because they wanted to, not because they had to. That shift, from necessity to choice, was the quiet victory of a sandwich nobody bragged about making. The women's club circuit ran on cream cheese and walnut sandwiches the way Detroit ran on gasoline. Every chapter meeting, every library fundraiser, every garden society luncheon had a tray of them. Thin rounds of Thomas's date nut bread spread with whipped cream cheese and pressed together with a layer of chopped walnuts between. The bread came out of a can, dense and sweet, sliced with a serrated knife into discs so thin the light came through. The cream cheese had to be room temperature, or it tore the bread apart. The walnuts had to be chopped fine, not minced, not halved, but fine, because the texture needed to disappear into the bite. These were not sandwiches you made for yourself. You made them for a room full of women who would notice if the bread was too thick or the cream cheese too cold. The standard was unspoken, but absolute, and the women who met it did so without recipes, without measuring cups, and without ever being told they'd done it right. If the cream cheese and walnut sandwich was a quiet act of precision, the frosted ribbon loaf was the showpiece it was building toward. The Better Homes and Gardens New Cookbook printed the recipe in 1973, But the dish had circulated through bridal showers and baby showers since the late 40s. You took an unsliced loaf of white bread, trimmed the crusts, cut it into horizontal layers like a cake, and filled each layer with a different spread. Ham salad, egg salad, pimento cheese, deviled ham with pickle. Then you frosted the whole thing in whipped cream cheese tinted pastel pink or green, chilled it until firm, and sliced it at the table. The gasps were the point. It looked like a cake and ate like a sandwich, and the woman who carried it in had spent the previous evening assembling it in silence while her family slept. The Swedish called theirs smörgåstårta and still make it for midsummer. Here, it faded with the last generation of women who considered a layered sandwich a competitive sport. McCall's Great American Recipe Card Collection dropped this one on America in 1973, and the nation has been trying to forget it ever since. You mashed a ripe banana with minced ham, spread the mixture on buttered white bread, and served it cold. A variation in Florence Cowell's 1001 sandwiches suggested sautéing banana slices and layering them on hot toast with deviled ham. The logic was not entirely insane. Sweet fruit and salty cured meat had a long tradition, and the Hawaiian pizza was doing fine. But something about mashing the two into a paste crossed a line that even the 70s couldn't defend. Kids who found this in their lunchboxes developed trust issues. Mothers who made it insisted it was delicious and could never explain why they stopped. The recipe card itself, with its bright photograph and cheerful instructions, became a punchline. Proof that the decade that gave us fondue sets and waterbed mattresses also tried to put banana in a ham sandwich and call it lunch. Before the squeamishness set in, beef tongue was a premium deli item. Sliced paper-thin, pink and smooth, laid across dark rye with nothing but a smear of brown mustard and maybe a leaf of lettuce if the counterman felt generous. Jewish delis and German delicatessens displayed whole tongues in their glass cases through the 60s, sitting alongside the pastrami and the corned beef, and nobody flinched. The preparation took hours, simmering, peeling the rough outer skin while the meat was still hot, pressing it under a weight to firm the texture, then slicing it so thin you could read the newspaper through it. It commanded a higher price than most cuts at the counter. By the 70s, a generation raised on boneless chicken breasts and shrink-wrapped steaks started asking what exactly they were eating, and the answer, a cow's tongue, ended the conversation. The old men who ordered it without looking at the menu are mostly gone now. The delis that sliced it are closing one by one. It cost nothing, because that was the whole point. 2 slices of white bread, a squeeze of ketchup, folded in half and eaten fast. The ketchup soaked into the bread and turned it pink and soft, almost dissolving before you finished chewing, and the taste was pure sugar and vinegar and the faint metallic tang of the bottle cap. Children ate these when the refrigerator held nothing else, and they ate them without complaint because complaining meant admitting something the whole house already knew. The ketchup sandwich was not on any recipe card. It appeared in no cookbook. It existed only in the space between payday and the day before payday, and the kids who grew up on them carry the memory differently, some with shame, some with a strange tenderness for the parent who made sure there was always bread and always ketchup, even when there was nothing else. You don't find it on any nostalgia list because the people who ate it don't talk about it in public. But they remember. Kraft printed the suggestion on a recipe card and dared America to try it. Velveeta cheese and grape jelly on white bread, grilled until the cheese turned to liquid and the jelly bled purple streaks through the whole mess. Parents who served it swore it covered both protein and fruit in a single sandwich, which was the kind of nutritional math that only the 1970s could produce with a straight face. The cold version was worse. Unmelted Velveeta had the texture of modeling clay, and the jelly sat on top like a wound. But the grilled version, if you caught it at the exact moment when the cheese had fully melted and the jelly had warmed into something almost like a glaze, landed somewhere between a grilled cheese and a Danish pastry. Kids who grew up eating them either loved them with a loyalty that embarrassed their adult selves or blocked the memory entirely. There was no middle ground. Velveeta and jelly was a commitment. The sweet-salty combination that made Velveeta and jelly a guilty pleasure found its purest expression in peanut butter and bacon, a sandwich that predated its most famous champion by decades. Before the Elvis version turned it into a novelty, working families in the 30s were pressing crispy fried bacon into peanut butter on toast because the combination packed more calories percent than almost anything else in the pantry. The crunch of the bacon against the dense pull of peanut butter made your jaw work, and that effort made the meal feel bigger than it was. By the 50s, the sandwich had gone mainstream enough to appear in women's magazines, though the articles always mentioned it with a wink, as though bacon with peanut butter was a charming eccentricity rather than a Depression-era survival strategy. Health concerns pushed it to the margins by the 80s. The people who still make it do so quietly, standing over the stove with the bacon popping, spreading peanut butter while the toast is still warm enough to soften it. Eloise ran the recipe in her newspaper column, and after that it showed up at every bunco night, every bridge game, and every potluck supper in the suburbs for 20 years. Olive nut spread was cream cheese beaten with mayonnaise, mixed with chopped green olives and toasted pecans, loosened with a splash of olive brine, and served on party rye or Triscuits, or, if the hostess was ambitious, stuffed into celery sticks and lined up on a silver tray. The proportions were never written precisely. Every woman adjusted to taste, adding more brine for salt, more pecans for crunch, and the arguments over whose version was best could outlast the card game. Some made it with black olives, some used walnuts. One family swore by date nut bread as the only proper vehicle. The spread kept in the refrigerator for weeks, technically, but it never lasted that long. It vanished the way all good potluck dishes vanish, scraped clean to the bottom of the bowl while the woman who made it pretended not to notice. You waited all year for it. The tomato sandwich existed only in August, when the garden tomatoes came in so heavy the vines bent sideways and the kitchen counter disappeared under a row of red fruit still warm from the sun. You sliced them thick, a quarter-inch at least, salted both sides, laid them on white bread spread with Duke's mayonnaise in the South or Hellmann's everywhere else, and ate standing over the sink because the juice ran down your wrist before you finished the first bite. There was no cheese, no lettuce, no herbs. The tomato and the mayo and the soft white bread did all the work, and anything you added was an insult to the garden. The old women knew the window, 2 weeks, maybe 3 when the tomatoes were perfect, and they made the sandwich every single day until the season turned. Store-bought tomatoes in January were a different species entirely, pale and mealy and cold, and the women who knew the difference refused to pretend otherwise. The cheese dream had no business being as good as it was. You laid a thick slice of sharp cheddar on white bread, slid it under the broiler until the edges curled and the center went bubbly and brown, and pulled it out with an oven mitt that smelled like every lunch you'd ever made. Diners and lunch counters served them open-faced through the 40s and 50s, sometimes with a slice of tomato underneath, sometimes with a few drops of Worcestershire stirred into the cheese before broiling. The name showed up in cookbooks as early as the 30s, and nobody agrees on who coined it. But the dish outlasted the argument. It was a grilled cheese that refused to close, bare-faced, browned until the kitchen filled with the sharp smell of melting fat. By the 70s, the microwave made it obsolete. You could melt cheese faster, but you couldn't get those charred edges, that crackle when the knife broke through the crust. The Monte Cristo arrived at the table dusted in powdered sugar with a ramekin of raspberry jam on the side, and if that sounds like it belongs in a different conversation than liverwurst and ketchup sandwiches, that was the point. It was a croque monsieur that crossed the Atlantic and lost its French restraint. Ham and turkey and Swiss cheese layered between bread, dipped in egg batter and fried golden in butter until the outside shattered and the inside went molten. Disneyland's Blue Bayou restaurant served one that became the standard by the 60s, battered thick and cut into triangles that leaked cheese onto the plate. Bennigan's built a menu around it in the 70s. The sweet-savory collision, powdered sugar against salty ham, warm jam against melted Swiss, was unlike anything else at lunch, and people either understood it immediately or stared in confusion. The restaurants that served it well are mostly shuttered. The ones that remain charge 3 times what it cost when the batter was made fresh. After the fried excess of the Monte Cristo, the cucumber tea sandwich arrived like a whisper. Paper-thin slices of cucumber on white bread spread with cold salted butter, crusts trimmed, cut into rectangles small enough to eat in 2 bites. The British brought the tradition, and American women's clubs adopted it for every luncheon and garden party from the 20s onward. The bread had to be fresh or it crumbled. The butter had to be soft or it tore. The cucumber had to be sliced so thin you could see your hand through it, and if someone asked you how thin, you were not the person who should be making them. There was no recipe because there was nothing to measure. Just bread, butter, cucumber, and a generation of women who understood that elegance was a form of discipline. The women's clubs are mostly gone. The silver trays sit in estate sales. The sandwiches survive only at hotel tea services that charge $40 for what used to cost a few cents and a steady hand. She made egg salad the morning of the funeral and brought it in a Tupperware container that she never got back. Hard-boiled eggs chopped with a fork, never a knife because the knife made the whites rubbery, mixed with Duke's mayonnaise, a spoon of yellow mustard, sweet pickle relish, and a pinch of paprika that went on top after the sandwich was assembled, never mixed in. The bread was always white, the crusts always removed, the halves always cut diagonal because that was how her mother had done it, and her mother before that. Egg salad showed up at baby showers, church potlucks, and every Southern funeral repast where the family was too broken to cook and the neighbors were not. The secret ingredient was never the relish or the mustard, it was the celery, diced so fine it disappeared into the texture but left a crunch that told you someone had taken the time. Today you can buy it pre-made at the deli counter, scooped from a plastic tub. It is not the same. The paprika is missing, and so is she. You made a butter and sugar sandwich when there was nothing else sweet in the house, and you were 8 years old and nobody was watching. White bread, a thick smear of butter, and a handful of granulated sugar shaken from the canister and pressed into the fat with the back of the knife. The sugar crunched between your teeth, and the butter melted against the roof of your mouth. And for 30 seconds, you had candy. Appalachian families called a version of it lard bread, rendered pork fat spread on biscuits with a shake of sugar, and it went back generations before anyone thought to feel ashamed of it. Working-class kids in the Midwest and the South ate them after school while their parents were still at the factory or the mill, standing at the counter the same way every kid in every era has eaten the thing they weren't supposed to have. It never showed up in a cookbook because it was never a recipe. It was just hunger and sugar and whatever the kitchen had. Gene Kelly, the dancer, not the neighbor, supposedly called it the greatest man sandwich in the world, and the name stuck even though nobody could verify where the recipe first appeared. You took cold leftover mashed potatoes, spread them thick on French bread, layered raw onion rings and a heavy streak of mayonnaise on top, hit it with salt and pepper, and slid the whole thing under the broiler until the potatoes browned and the bread crisped. The instructions said to eat it with the nearest mug of beer. This was a sandwich built from whatever was left in the refrigerator on a Tuesday night when cooking felt like too much, and the fact that a movie star put his name on it gave every exhausted father permission to call leftovers dinner. The mashed potatoes had to be cold. Warm ones turned to paste under the broiler. The onion had to be raw. Cooked onion lost its bite. Get both right, and you had something worth eating. Get them wrong, and you had hot bread with gray paste. In the South, pimento cheese was not a dip, and it was not an appetizer. It was a sandwich filling, spread thick on white bread or stuffed into celery stalks, and the arguments over whose recipe was best could split a church down the middle. The base was always sharp cheddar grated by hand on a box grater, mixed with mayonnaise and diced pimientos, but after that, the variations were endless. Some families added cream cheese for smoothness. Others swore by a dash of cayenne. Everyone agreed that store-bought pimento cheese was an insult. Putting a plastic tub on the table at a gathering meant you had given up. The women who made it from scratch grated the cheese that morning and mixed it by hand, adjusting by taste, never by measurement. Those hands are slower now, and some have stopped altogether. The recipe cards they left behind always say the same thing: sharp cheddar, mayo, pimientos. They never say how much, because the women who wrote them knew you were supposed to already know. The spaghetti sandwich was not a recipe. It was an act of faith in leftovers. You took last night's spaghetti, cold from the refrigerator, the noodles stuck together in a tangled clump, the sauce dried to a dark crust around the edges, and pressed it between two slices of soft white bread and ate it standing over the counter with a paper towel tucked into your collar. Italian-American families in the Northeast did this without thinking, the same way their grandmothers in Calabria and Sicily had packed bread with whatever was left from the night before. The bread soaked up the cold sauce, the noodles gave it weight. The whole thing held together just long enough to finish eating, and if it fell apart in your hands, you scooped the mess back onto the bread and kept going. Nobody photographed it. Nobody put it on a menu. It existed only in the space between dinner and the next dinner, made by hands that understood the difference between cooking and wasting. Those kitchens are quieter now. Fried apple biscuit brought orchard sweetness to the breakfast table, combining quickly cooked apples with fresh biscuits for a meal that felt almost like dessert. Apples were sliced thin and fried in butter with a sprinkle of sugar and cinnamon until they softened and their edges began to caramelize. The warm fruit was spooned onto split biscuits, the juices soaking into the bread while the apple slices provided tender sweetness. During apple season, this sandwich appeared regularly on farm tables, using fruit that might otherwise go to waste before it could be properly preserved. The preparation took barely 5 minutes, yet created something that children and adults alike looked forward to. Some families added a drizzle of cream or a pat of butter for extra richness. The combination of warm spiced fruit and tender biscuit represented the best of country cooking, where seasonal abundance met morning hunger. In the 1930s, two things sat in nearly every American pantry: a jar of peanut butter and a jar of mayonnaise. Someone put them together on bread, and the peanut butter and mayonnaise sandwich became a survival staple that lasted decades. The richness of peanut butter against the tang of mayo creates something unexpectedly balanced, almost savory, with enough fat and protein to carry a body through hard work. Skippy hit shelves in '33. Miracle Whip arrived the same year, and both gave families affordable staples that stretched across every meal. Kids ate these 5 days running because there was nothing else, and complaining about food was something you did not do. The sandwich held through the '50s, mostly in the South, where Duke's mayo and thick peanut butter on white bread was as ordinary as breathing. It slipped away not because anyone turned against it. It just got buried under the choices that came after the lean years ended. Potted meat sandwiches turned tiny cans of processed meat spread into filling meals that sustained working families across America. The small, affordable cans contained finely ground meat mixed with seasonings and gelatin, creating a spreadable paste covering bread easily. The flavor was salty and vaguely meaty, with smooth texture that children found less intimidating than tougher cuts. Spread thick between slices of soft white bread, sometimes with mustard or pickle slices, potted meat made a complete sandwich for pennies. The cans required no refrigeration until opened, making them perfect pantry staples for homes without reliable icebox access. Families bought them by the case when money allowed, stockpiling affordable protein against uncertain times. The sandwiches appeared at picnics, in lunch boxes, and on dinner tables when paychecks ran thin. Children grew up eating them without realizing how clever their mothers were at stretching resources. Today, potted meat still exists in stores, a quiet reminder of survival cooking. Bacon grease toast was pure mountain efficiency, transforming yesterday's cooking fat into today's breakfast in under 3 minutes. After frying bacon, families saved the rendered grease in tin cans kept near the stove, ready for any cooking need. A thick slice of homemade bread would be placed directly in the warm skillet, absorbing the smoky bacon fat until the bottom turned golden and crispy. Flipped once, the bread emerged transformed, carrying the essence of bacon without requiring any actual meat. Some families sprinkled salt or sugar on top, depending on preference. Others ate it plain, letting the rich pork flavor speak for itself. This wasn't poverty food in the shameful sense, but rather brilliant resourcefulness that wasted nothing. The bread's texture became extraordinary, crispy on the outside, yet soft within, infused with smoky richness. Bacon grease toast fed families during lean times and flush times alike, proving great breakfasts needed nothing more than bread and leftover fat. The smell of a cheese dream coming out of the oven could fill a whole house. Sharp cheddar bubbling over toasted white bread, the faint char of tomato sauce underneath turning sweet in the heat. Cheese dreams were the Depression-era answer to Feeding Company when the pantry was bare. A 1932 San Jose News article called them the newest favorite sandwich, though Good Housekeeping had featured them by 1918 as a luncheon dish. The recipe was simple: bread, butter, a thick slab of cheese, mustard, and cayenne, browned on both sides or slid under the broiler until the cheese pooled and crisped. Some added a tomato slice or bacon if the household could manage, served with olives on the side because even cheap suppers deserved presentation. They called them dreams because cheese on bread was as close to luxury as most families got. The grilled cheese replaced it and erased the name. Onion sandwiches carried a sharp, pungent honesty that defined working-class meals when meat was scarce and gardens provided what little families had. A thick slice of raw white onion was placed between bread spread with butter or lard, seasoned only with salt. The flavor was bold, almost aggressive, clearing sinuses and filling bellies with something substantial enough to call dinner. During the Depression, raw onions cost pennies and lasted weeks in cool cellars, making them reliable sustenance when nothing else was available. The sandwich required no cooking and could be assembled in seconds by tired workers returning home. Children learned to eat them without complaint because complaining meant going hungry. The sharpness seemed to wake up taste buds dulled by bland, poverty-era meals. Seniors today remember the sandwich with mixed emotions, recalling both the hardship it represented and the strange satisfaction it provided. What seemed like desperation food actually delivered vitamins and fullness when families had almost nothing. Cornbread crumble sandwich was a resourceful breakfast that gave yesterday's cornbread new life with nothing more than buttermilk in a bowl. Leftover cornbread was crumbled into chunks, then covered with cold buttermilk until the bread softened but didn't completely dissolve. Some families added a spoon of sugar, others preferred it savory with a pinch of salt. The mixture was eaten with a spoon but carried the same satisfaction as any handheld sandwich. This wasn't elegant food, but rather survival cuisine that wasted nothing and provided genuine nourishment. The tangy buttermilk combined with the sweet cornmeal created a flavor profile that was distinctly Southern and deeply comforting. Farm families ate this during summer months when cold food appealed more than hot biscuits. Children grew up with this as a familiar breakfast option, never questioning its unusual form. The sandwich represented practical wisdom, showing how creativity could transform leftovers into something worth eating. Long before anyone dressed a sandwich with deli meat, families in coal country pulled lard from a tin bucket and smeared it across whatever bread they had. The lard sandwich was rendered pig fat, white and thick, on day-old bread with a pinch of salt. That was lunch. In Depression-era Iowa, Richard Willis remembered eating them as a boy, and across Appalachia and the coal towns of West Virginia, kids carried lard sandwiches in their pails because there was nothing else. Sometimes the bread was open-face and topped with cold beans, sometimes folded shut and wrapped in newspaper. The fat kept you full through a shift in the mine or a morning in the schoolhouse. It tasted like survival, and nobody pretended otherwise. The families who ate them didn't talk about it afterward. That silence said everything about what those years cost. Syrup sandwiches carried sweetness and energy to children who needed both during years when sugar was rationed and treats were rare. Sorghum, molasses, or cane syrup was drizzled generously over soft bread, sometimes topped with another slice, sometimes eaten open-faced. The dark, sticky sweetness spread across the bread like liquid candy, providing quick fuel for active children and tired workers alike. The flavor was deep and complex, far more interesting than plain sugar, with mineral notes and earthy undertones. Families kept jars of syrup in pantries throughout the South, using it as affordable sweetener when refined sugar cost too much. The sandwich required no cooking and assembled in seconds when hunger struck between meals. Children begged for these as treats, not realizing they were also survival food born from necessity. The syrup's thickness made the sandwich filling despite containing little actual nutrition beyond carbohydrates. Seniors remember the sticky fingers and satisfied smiles following every syrup sandwich. Cracklin' Biscuit was a celebration of pig butchering season, featuring those crispy bits of rendered pork fat baked right into the bread itself. When families rendered lard, the leftover pieces of fried pork skin and fat became cracklins, crunchy morsels packed with flavor. These were folded into biscuit dough before baking, creating bread that was rich, salty, and satisfying straight from the oven. No additional filling was needed because the cracklins provided all the flavor and fat a body required. Split and buttered while still warm, these biscuits represented abundance during the season when fresh pork was available. The cracklins added textural interest, their crunch contrasting with the tender biscuit surrounding them. Families looked forward to butchering time partly because it meant cracklin' biscuits for breakfast. This sandwich connected people to the rhythm of rural life, where food followed seasons and nothing was ever wasted. She buttered the bread first, always. Then the sugar, white, granulated, poured from the bag and pressed into the butter with the back of a spoon until the crystals caught. The butter and sugar sandwich was the after-school secret of every kid who grew up where the grocery money ran thin by Thursday. Nobody called it a recipe. You just knew. The crunch of sugar against soft bread, the way it dissolved on your tongue, the faint salt of butter underneath, that was the reward for making it through another day. It showed up in mining towns and mill villages during the Depression, and it never really left. Through the 50s and 60s, kids in Appalachia, the rural South, and factory neighborhoods from Detroit to Pittsburgh still came home to this. Some used brown sugar, some added cinnamon, some just used whatever bread was going stale because waste was something those kitchens refused. Banana and mayonnaise sandwiches sound strange to modern ears, but were beloved comfort food throughout the South during the mid-20th century. The combination emerged when bananas became affordable, and Southern cooks discovered that mayonnaise's creamy richness paired surprisingly well with the fruit's sweetness. Ripe bananas were sliced onto soft white bread slathered with mayo, sometimes with a sprinkle of salt. The texture was creamy and soft, almost like eating banana pudding in sandwich form. Children loved these because they tasted like a treat despite costing almost nothing. The sandwich provided quick energy from natural sugars, while the mayo added satisfying richness. Families packed them for school lunches, knowing they stayed fresh longer than many alternatives. Duke's mayonnaise was the preferred brand in Southern households. Today, this sandwich divides people into believers and skeptics, but seniors who grew up eating them remember the simple pleasure of something special from humble ingredients. The fried mush sandwich turned yesterday's cornmeal porridge into this morning's crispy breakfast in the time it took to heat a skillet. Leftover cornmeal mush was poured into loaf pans the night before, where it would set firm as it cooled. Come morning, thick slices were cut from the solidified mush and fried in lard or bacon grease until both sides developed a golden crust that crackled when bitten. These crispy slices were placed between bread or simply eaten with syrup poured over top. The texture contrast was remarkable, the exterior shattering to reveal a creamy, corn-sweet interior that brought comfort and sustenance. This sandwich stretched resources brilliantly, turning one pot of mush into multiple meals across 2 days. Farm families across the Midwest and South relied on this transformation, knowing that nothing cooked should ever go to waste. Children especially loved the sweet corn flavor combined with the satisfying crunch, making it a breakfast worth waking early for. Before deli counters became a daily stop, there was the Underwood deviled ham can, small, white paper label, red devil logo, and a pull tab that required more wrist strength than any child had. The William Underwood Company started canning this spiced ham paste in 1868 out of New England, making it one of the oldest trademarked food products in American history. Your mother mixed it with a fork, just the ham, yellow mustard, maybe a scrape of mayo, and spread it across white bread so fast you barely saw the knife move. Through the 40s and 50s, that little can sat in every pantry, next to the Vienna sausages and the saltines. The flavor was sharp, peppery, salty, the kind of taste that points you to a specific kitchen. Kids who carried those sandwiches in wax paper can still describe the smell when they peeled it open at the cafeteria table. Most of them can tell you exactly who made it. Bacon dripping sandwiches turned saved cooking fat into meals delivering rich, smoky satisfaction without wasting precious bacon. Families saved bacon grease in jars beside the stove, the accumulated fat representing flavor wealth too valuable to discard. The drippings were spread onto bread while still warm, absorbing into the soft surface and creating butter-like richness. Salt was usually unnecessary since the bacon fat carried plenty, though some added pepper for warmth. The flavor was unmistakably bacon without requiring actual bacon, stretching the essence of expensive cured pork across many meals. During the Depression and wartime rationing, this sandwich appeared in households where meat was rationed or unaffordable. Children ate these without complaint because the smoky richness satisfied cravings that plain bread never could. The fat provided calories desperately needed by growing bodies and working adults. Seniors remember their mothers guarding the bacon grease jar, knowing those drippings transformed ordinary bread. Sawmill gravy biscuit was the quintessential Southern breakfast. Thick white gravy ladled over a split buttermilk biscuit that could be eaten with hands or fork. The gravy started with meat drippings, usually from sausage or bacon, mixed with flour to create a roux that thickened as milk was slowly added. Black pepper provided heat and visual interest, the dark specks scattered through the creamy white sauce. Split biscuits were arranged on plates as the gravy was spooned generously over top, the bread absorbing the rich sauce while maintaining enough structure to be picked up and eaten. This wasn't a sandwich in the traditional sense, but rather an open-faced creation that satisfied hunger like nothing else could. Sawmill workers and loggers depended on this hearty breakfast to fuel brutal physical labor. The gravy stretched a small amount of meat into a meal that fed entire families, proving that ingenuity and skill could multiply resources. You could smell a liverwurst sandwich from across the cafeteria, that dense mineral scent announcing itself before you opened the wax paper. Liverwurst and raw onion on rye was a deli standard from the 1940s through the 70s, common as pastrami in neighborhoods where German immigrants had settled. The sausage was soft enough to spread, ground from pork liver with black pepper, marjoram, and allspice, sliced thick at the counter. You ate it on dark rye with spicy brown mustard and onion rings sharp enough to water your eyes. In the Midwest, sweet pickles went on top. In the Northeast, dill. Either way, it was a workingman's lunch, filling, cheap, strong enough to carry you through the afternoon. Boar's Head stopped producing it entirely in 2024. The old German delis that sliced it fresh are closing one by one. If your father ate liverwurst, you remember the smell. You probably never made one yourself. Sardine sandwiches delivered complete protein and essential fats to families who couldn't afford fresh fish or expensive meats during lean times. Small tins of sardines packed in oil sat on pantry shelves, ready to become instant meals whenever hunger called. The tiny fish were mashed onto bread with a fork, their salty, oily richness spreading easily. Some families added sliced onion or a squeeze of lemon to cut through the fishiness. The flavor was bold and unmistakably oceanic, filling kitchens with a distinctive aroma. A single tin could feed 2 people when stretched with plenty of bread, making sardines remarkably economical. The calcium from soft, edible bones provided nutrition that growing children desperately needed. Sardine sandwiches appeared in factory lunch pails and school bags throughout working-class America. Seniors remember their fathers eating these after long shifts, the tin opened with a key that peeled back the lid. The sandwich carried honest nourishment, tasting better than its humble reputation suggested. Sorghum biscuit was the mountain sweetener's answer to fancy breakfast pastries, featuring that thick amber syrup poured over hot split biscuits. Sorghum, pressed from tall cane stalks grown in Appalachian hollows, had a distinctive flavor that was earthier and less refined than molasses or honey. The syrup was drizzled generously over buttered biscuits still steaming from the oven, pooling in the bread's soft interior. Children licked their fingers clean after every bite, savoring the mineral-rich sweetness that no store-bought syrup could match. Families grew their own sorghum cane and pressed it at community mills each fall, creating enough syrup to last through winter. The flavor carried hints of smoke and grass, a taste that connected people directly to the land they worked. This sandwich required nothing fancy, just fresh biscuits and homemade syrup. Yet it delivered satisfaction that modern breakfast treats cannot replicate. Sorghum biscuits represented self-sufficiency and the pride of producing your own sweetness. In every small-town grocery from the 1940s through the 70s, there was a tub of bologna salad behind the deli glass, right next to the pimento cheese. It started as mock ham salad during the Depression. Chopped grocery store bologna run through a hand grinder with hard-boiled eggs, sweet pickle relish, diced onion, and enough mayonnaise to hold it together. It fed families who couldn't afford actual ham but refused to send kids to school empty-handed. A pound of bologna cost a fraction of what ham ran, and ground up with the fixings, nobody at that lunch table knew the difference. In Detroit and across the Deep South, it became the thing itself. Mothers scooped it onto white bread with the confidence of women serving a holiday spread. The taste was salty, tangy, creamy, with pickle crunch holding it together. By the 80s, pre-packaged meats pushed it out. But somewhere, someone is still grinding that bologna by hand. Peanut butter and pickle sandwiches emerged from Depression-era creativity and stuck around because they actually tasted surprisingly good. Creamy peanut butter was spread thick on one slice, while dill pickle slices covered the other, creating a combination that sounds wrong but works. The salty, tangy pickles cut through the peanut butter's richness, creating flavor contrast that kept taste buds interested. Children often loved these despite their strangeness, and mothers appreciated the protein combined with preserved vegetables. The pickles provided crunch that peanut butter alone couldn't offer, plus the vinegar balanced the fatty richness. Families made these when lunch meat was unavailable, but the pickle jar and peanut butter sat waiting in the pantry. The cost was negligible since both ingredients lasted weeks without refrigeration. Seniors today either remember loving these or being confused by the combination. What seemed like desperation food actually delivered balanced nutrition and genuinely interesting flavors. Molasses butter biscuit was a sweet morning treat that sustained generations of children heading off to school or fieldwork. A fresh biscuit, still warm from the wood stove, would be split open and spread generously with butter that melted instantly into the crumb. Then came the molasses. That dark, thick syrup drizzled over the butter until it pooled in the biscuit's crevices. The combination created something between breakfast and dessert, the butter's richness cutting the molasses' intense sweetness. During hard times when sugar was expensive, molasses served as the sweetener of choice for rural families across the South. Children wrapped these sandwiches in cloth napkins, carrying them to one-room schoolhouses where they provided energy through long morning lessons. The taste was bold and distinctive, nothing like the mild sweetness of modern pastries. This sandwich represented care and creativity, proving that even the simplest ingredients could make mornings feel special. Your grandmother made the banana and mayonnaise sandwich the same way every time. Ripe banana sliced lengthwise, a thick spread of Duke's mayo, 2 pieces of the softest white bread in the house. In Southern kitchens from the 1930s through the 70s, this was as common as sweet tea. The combination sounds wrong to modern ears, but the creamy tang of mayo against the sweetness of ripe banana was something close to perfect. It cost almost nothing. A single banana ran about 2 cents during the Depression, and mayo stretched across every meal. Dale Earnhardt Jr. still talks about eating them, but he describes them the way you describe something from another world. You either grew up with it or you didn't. And if you didn't, nobody could explain it. The woman who made yours is probably gone now. The sandwich left when she did. Crackling bread sandwiches combined 2 Southern traditions into one gloriously rich meal that wasted nothing from the family hog. Cracklings, the crispy bits left after rendering pork fat into lard, were stirred into cornbread batter before baking, creating bread studded with salty, crunchy pork pieces. Sliced thick and still warm, the crackling bread was eaten between pieces of regular bread or simply split and buttered. The flavor was intensely porky, salty, and satisfying in ways that plain cornbread could never match. This sandwich represented the waste-nothing philosophy defining rural Southern cooking during hard times. Every scrap of the pig found purpose, including the crispy remnants of rendering. Families made crackling bread during hog killing season, when lard production created pounds of cracklings. The bread kept well for days, becoming sandwich material for lunch pails and quick suppers. Seniors from rural areas remember the smoky aroma-filling kitchens and the satisfying crunch of crackling studded bread. Fried egg and fatback biscuit was the working man's fuel that powered countless mornings across Appalachia and the rural South. Fatback, that thick slab of pure pork fat from the pig's back, would be sliced thin and fried in a cast-iron skillet until the edges turned crispy and golden while rendering out precious grease. Into that same bubbling fat went a fresh egg, the whites crisping at the edges while the yolk stayed soft and runny. The whole assembly was placed between halves of a hot buttermilk biscuit, the egg yolk breaking and mixing with the salty pork fat to create a natural sauce that soaked into the bread. This sandwich cost almost nothing to make, yet delivered protein, fat, and carbohydrates in perfect balance. Families kept fatback in the smokehouse or root cellar, ready for any morning when time was short but hunger was real. The combination of crispy pork, creamy egg, and tender biscuit created something genuinely satisfying that no modern breakfast sandwich has managed to replicate. Cold baked beans mashed between two slices of bread. That was a factory worker's lunch in every mill town from Fall River to Flint. British immigrants brought the habit to American shores, and it settled into the lunch pails of men who worked 12-hour shifts and needed something that held together in a tin box until noon. The beans were Saturday night's leftovers, thick with molasses and salt pork remnants, scooped cold onto buttered bread and pressed flat. Sometimes a tomato slice if the garden was producing, sometimes a leaf of lettuce, mostly just beans and bread. A 1929 sandwich cookbook recommended them mashed smooth with mayonnaise and chopped onion for variety, and dozens of factory towns had their own versions, some with a drizzle of vinegar, some with a smear of mustard across the top slice. The taste was sweet, salty, dense, the kind of lunch that sat heavy in your stomach and kept you standing through the shift. When the factories closed and lunch counters replaced pails, the baked bean sandwich quietly left the table. Mustard sandwiches represented rock-bottom survival food during the hardest years of American poverty, yet they carried surprising dignity in their simplicity. 2 slices of bread spread generously with bright yellow mustard created a meal costing virtually nothing but still feeling intentional. The tangy, vinegary bite provided flavor intensity that plain bread could never deliver alone. Children walked to school with these in their lunch pails during the Depression, eating them without shame because everyone understood hard times. The mustard's sharpness fooled the brain into thinking something more substantial had been consumed. Families kept large jars of cheap yellow mustard in pantries, knowing it could stretch meals when nothing remained. The sandwich required no refrigeration and could be made by the youngest child. Seniors who survived those lean years remember mustard sandwiches with quiet pride, knowing they represented resilience and determination to eat something rather than nothing. Streak a lean biscuit was Appalachian breakfast perfection, featuring that thin-cut salt-cured pork that sat somewhere between bacon and fatback. The meat was sliced from the pig's belly, carrying streaks of lean meat through the fat that gave it both name and character. Fried quickly in a hot skillet, streak a lean rendered its fat while the lean portions crisped and curled at the edges. Tucked into a split biscuit with maybe a smear of butter or apple butter, this sandwich delivered salty, smoky satisfaction that powered hours of farm labor. The meat cost less than proper bacon but carried more flavor than plain fatback. Families cured their own streak o' lean in smokehouses each fall, ensuring a supply of breakfast meat that lasted through winter and into spring. This sandwich represented the kind of self-sufficiency that defined mountain life, where families raised and preserved their own food. Nobody under 50 has heard of the egg and olive sandwich, but mention it to a woman who attended a church potluck before 1970 and watch her face change. Chopped green olives folded into creamy egg salad, The brine, cutting through the richness of yolk, made this a fixture at ladies' luncheons and covered dish suppers through the 40s and 50s. Hard-boiled eggs mashed with a fork, a handful of manzanilla olives, mayonnaise, a dash of paprika. It went on crustless white bread, cut into triangles, arranged with the kind of precision that said presentation was its own pride. Jars of stuffed olives cost pennies, and every kitchen had one. The sandwich disappeared when formal gatherings stopped and convenience foods took over. Nobody killed it. The world just moved too fast for crustless triangles. 30 kitchens went quiet, and the recipes didn't survive the silence. If your hands still remember, leave the name of the dish in the comments.